but not the same language as me, whose values and culture were different, whose choices, and when I say not the same language, I was born to speak English, but as you know, we are countries divided by a common language, but whose culture and values were different, and whose choices here in America were totally overwhelming for me. And people seemed to be mostly busy with their own lives and not particularly interested in the fortunes of a young South African white woman. And in fact, I seemed to carry the burden of apartheid on my shoulders, and the fact that I left there on account of that didn't seem to matter at all. It seemed that I was to blame for everything that happened there. And all of that leadership experience that I had, and the confidence that I built in my formative years, went completely out of the window as I learned how to use payphones and to navigate the subways. I was in a wilderness of sorts. And what I learned in the Girl Scouts didn't help me one bit. This was a real wilderness, maybe a bit of a jungle. So what does one do when one's in that position? Where the experiences that you've had, the worldview that you've had, your life up until then, has not prepared you for the future that lies ahead of you. You thought it did, or you never thought about it at all, and suddenly you're faced with this kind of position. Well, in my case, what I decided to do was to buckle down and to start with the tools that I had. And it was the Chinese Taoist philosopher Lao Tzu, what he wrote, that actually has guided me quite a lot in my life. And he said that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And you put one foot after the other, and before you know it, you're a little down the road, and you're better off than you were when you started. So wherever you start, that's where you start, and that point leads you to somewhere else. Hopefully, the somewhere else is somewhere that you want to go. I've been guided by this principle and the value of social justice from my childhood that precipitated my involvement in the anti-apartheid movement. And the challenge to me was how to apply the skills that I'd learned from South Africa, the profession that I'd chosen, and in my case it was social work, that I'd learned in South Africa to my life experiences now in this new country. So I did the most obvious thing that I knew how to do, which was to find work, some kind of work, that would provide a meaningful outlet for my social values and commitment to social justice. At first, this wasn't in any way the way that I'd imagined, not at all. Not the exact work I dreamed of. I had all kinds of fantasies of what kind of leadership roles I was going to play. I mean, I didn't even know how to get down the street and into other cities and how things worked. I had no contact. I'm probably the only person of my generation that actually got a job through the New York Times, because I didn't know anybody else, didn't have those kinds of contacts. We didn't have these kinds of organizations, and if we did, I didn't know about them, not this immigrant. But it began with me trying to figure out what kind of work would more or less head me in the direction that would be consistent with my values and my priorities. And that led me to work for a while as a new leader. I was the CEO of an agency providing shelter to battered women and their children, and then helping later defense teams prepare death penalty cases. Now, to tell you that I knew anything about domestic violence, I didn't, not at all. But nobody else did either, so you could say whatever you liked and it would be true, because nobody would contradict you. It's fabulous. You should always try a new field. Nobody will contradict you. But as I say, it wasn't exactly like I imagined, but I felt that I was being helpful to the people that I was serving, and that I was making a difference, and that it mattered. And I must tell you that when you get a call at 4 in the morning from somebody who's on the street with their children and is battered and bruised, you're actually not thinking about yourself, and you're not thinking about your sleep. You're thinking about, how do I get there and pick that person up and take them to a safe place? And there's nothing like having the kinds of experiences in which the purposes of your work are greater than your own lives and experiences to move you in the kind of direction that feels useful and helpful. I was even able to persuade one public interest organization later on, when I moved into the public policy arena. I didn't stay in the direct service arena, and I was able to persuade one of the public policy interest organizations that I worked in to actually get involved in the anti-apartheid movement, which was still very alive and active at that point in time, which allowed me at least to tie some of my background to my life work here in the United States. And slowly that work helped me to move inch by inch closer to my underlying passions and interests, all while navigating new landscapes and learning about fresh problems. So I guess the lesson that I learned out of this is that when I was 10 and 15 and 18, I had a vivid and clear idea of the trajectory of my life, and it didn't turn out that way at all. But if you have a set of values and you've got a set of passions and an idea of your interests, you will get there. It may not be the road that you think you'll take, but you'll get there nonetheless. And in each of my roles prior to the one that I'm in now, the ideas I had were always broader than the position allowed for, and seemed to call for what I would call position renovation. It's not exactly the way my bosses saw it, but it was a little tricky for me, because it was welcomed by some and there was a lot of pushback by others. And sometimes the challenges in the organizations that I was in were about resources. Other times there were structural impediments, and still other times it was about a boss who didn't much value what we were doing. But it felt all the time that what I needed to do, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes it felt that if I really wanted to achieve my goals in the various jobs that I had to do the whole darn thing myself. And that was mistake number 1, or number 25, that I made. Because I can tell you that whenever you think that because others aren't collaborating and cooperating with you, you should just do the whole darn thing yourself, that's when you're making a mistake. Try looking in the mirror and figuring out how you're saying it in a different way, and bringing people together. I thought also at the time that if I was the CEO, I could make all of this happen, and that in that particular role, I would achieve the goals, and that it was because of bosses and limited power and limited resources that I wasn't able to do these things myself. But then I also remembered that as a CEO, we have bosses too. In this case, the bosses may not be a paid professional, they are the boards to whom we report. But we're accountable as CEOs not only to the boards to whom we report, we're also accountable to the staff that we lead. We're accountable to the consumers of our service, and to the funders, and also to the interested and sometimes somewhat intrusive public. We're sometimes accountable to the public via the press. Wait until you get those press calls, and they ask you questions that you don't want to answer, and you certainly don't want to see on the front page of your local or national newspaper. But in any case, I think that what I also learned then, and I know now, is that doing something well and enduring takes a whole team of people. It's not about a single CEO. Each person bringing to the table different skills, interests, and a commitment to making sure that it gets done. So here at my organization, Independent Sector, and I'm delighted to say that I have 2 colleagues here. There's Megan at the back, Megan Hoot, and Matthew Briggs over here. Here at my organization, so shout out if you disagree, but let me finish my sentence first. But here at IS, where I am the most senior professional,